The sun rose slowly over Denver, casting gold and rose streaks across the Rocky Mountains. From above, the peaks glimmered like frost-covered crowns, jagged and majestic. Flight 742, a sleek silver Boeing 777, sat at the gate like a silent predator, engines humming in low anticipation. Passengers trickled through the jet bridge, rolling suitcases and clutching coffee cups. A few nervous glances exchanged over boarding passes. The world outside was calm, serene, deceptive calm. Inside, 11-year-old Maya Collins tapped her pencil against a worn sketchbook, eyes following the clouds in the terminal window. She had always been fascinated by airplanes, the way they seemed to defy gravity, to slice through clouds as though cutting through fabric. Today, her fascination felt electric. Something about this flight made her heart drum faster than usual, though she could not explain why. Her sketchbook was full of drawings, wing flaps, landing gears, cockpits, pilots, instruments. She traced her fingers over the pencil lines, imagining herself as the one at the controls. Families boarded behind her, a mother soothing a fussy toddler, a businessman absorbed in his phone, a couple whispering plans for their honeymoon in Orlando. Maya's mother gave her a reassuring hug as they reached seat 17C, tucked neatly by the window. "Keep your seatbelt fastened," she said with a nervous smile, brushing back Maya's dark hair. "Don't get too lost in your drawings." Maya didn't reply. She was too busy absorbing the hum of the cabin, the mechanical breathing of the plane as it prepared to lift. She liked the smell, a mix of plastic, recycled air, and faint hints of coffee. There was an energy inside the plane that she could almost feel, like electricity running just beneath the surface. Up front, Captain Reynolds, a veteran of 25 years, performed pre-flight checks with methodical precision. His uniform was immaculate, his voice calm and reassuring over the intercom. Beside him, First Officer Hale, younger but equally experienced, tapped lightly at the instruments, double-checking fuel readings and engine diagnostics. They joked lightly about turbulence over Kansas, unaware of the forces preparing to challenge them. The cockpit was a controlled world of switches, lights, and dials, a symphony of human engineering waiting to be played. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, passengers felt the subtle vibration of power in their seats. Drinks rattled in cups, some passengers reached for armrests, and the toddler in 12B wailed as the engines roared louder. Maya gripped her seat, eyes wide, pencil still in hand. She imagined herself holding the yoke, feeling the controls respond to her touch, guiding the plane gracefully through the skis. The flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin, warm and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 742 to Chicago. We'll be taking off shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are secured." Her smile was genuine, but tension hid beneath it, the kind that came from knowing that even routine flights carried unseen dangers. The plane surged forward. Wheels rolled over tarmac faster and faster until the liftoff point was reached. And then, light as a feather, yet terrifying in its serenity, Flight 742 left the ground. Windows framed a stunning panorama, Denver fatting beneath them, rivers gleaming like ribbons of silver, highways weaving through cities and towns below. Children pressed noses against the glass. Maya's hand hovered over her sketchbook, imagining herself commanding the aircraft, feeling the engine's vibration through her fingertips. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect. Passengers settled into the rhythm of flight. A businessman typed rapidly on his laptop, earbuds in, oblivious to the beauty around him. A mother sang quietly to her toddler. Maya's notebook filled with sketches, wing angles, altitude readings, the imaginary cockpit she had drawn in perfect detail. She traced a tiny line where the yoke should be, unconsciously drawing herself in control, unaware that this imagination might soon collide with reality. Up front, Reynolds adjusted the throttle with casual ease. Hale monitored instruments with keen attention, their laughter from moments before now replaced by quiet professionalism. The plane cut through clouds like a blade, the hum of engines almost meditative. There was a sense of absolute control in the cockpit, a sacred rhythm between humans and machine. Then a subtle tremor passed through the cabin. Drinks sloshed over rims, seatbelts tightened instinctively around passengers. It was barely perceptible, but Maya felt it immediately, a flicker of unease that made her stomach tighten. She glanced at her mother, who offered a distracted smile. No one else seemed to notice. Maya traced her pencil along the edge of a wing in her sketchbook, trying to focus, when another tremor hit stronger this time. A low, mechanical groan echoed from the engines. Hale frowned, scanning the instruments, adjusting dials. Reynolds' calm voice filled the cockpit, but this time there was an edge of tension. "Something's off," Hale muttered under his breath. The plane rocked. A sharp vibration ran through the fuselage. Passengers murmured, a few clutched armrests, some exchanged nervous glances. Maya's pencil stopped mid-stroke. Her eyes went wide as the vibration intensified. "Cabin crew, prepare for turbulence," Reynolds said, but his voice was calm, almost too calm. Hale's hands flew over switches and buttons, but the tremors didn't subside. Outside, clouds thickened, gray and angry-looking, swirling as though warning of a storm. Maya felt her heartbeat accelerate. Something about the plane's movement was wrong, not turbulence, not wind, something mechanical. She studied the instruments she could see from her window. Nothing made sense, yet her instincts screamed. A sudden jolt threw passengers against their seatbelts. Cups spilled, laptops slid across trays, and a mother screamed as her child fell against the seat. The plane shuddered violently. Outside the window, sunlight fractured into streaks through clouds, casting eerie shadows across the cabin. Maya clutched the armrest, her small fingers digging into plastic. Her sketchbook slipped to the floor, pages fluttering like trapped birds. She picked it up and traced her pencil over the yoke she had drawn, and for the first time imagined herself sitting in the cockpit, hands on the controls, heart pounding, eyes wide. A siren blared suddenly, sharp, urgent. A single alarm that sliced through the cabin's murmurs. Passengers froze. Flight attendants yelled over the chaos, trying to calm screaming children, passengers clutching each other in terror. Hale's voice cracked over the intercom. "Cabin crew, brace for immediate, oh God." Maya felt a cold sweat. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She didn't yet understand how catastrophic it could be, but she felt it, a deep, visceral knowledge. The plane shuddered again, sharper, more violent. Reynolds' voice, usually the calm anchor of the flight, dropped off mid-word. Hale swore under his breath. Maya's mother grabbed her hand, eyes wide with fear. The plane lurched forward and then dropped slightly, a stomach-sinking plummet that made coffee cups fly. And then silence. Not the gentle calm of high altitude, but a chilling, unnatural silence from the cockpit. No chatter, no throttle adjustments, just the plane humming, unstable, waiting. Maya's pencil froze midair. She looked up at the cockpit, feeling a pull toward it she couldn't explain. Something told her she needed to be there at the front to see, to do something. The plane's nose tilted slightly downward, just enough to send the cabin into uneasy murmurs. Outside, clouds swirled faster, darker, like an approaching wall of gray water. Passengers clutched each other. Some prayed, others screamed. Maya gripped her mother's hand, then released it instinctively, her curiosity and instinct overtaking fear. She stood, moving with purpose through the chaos, drawing eyes from passengers and flight attendants alike. No one stopped her. The plane jolted again, throwing her slightly, yet she continued forward, pencil and sketchbook tucked under her arm. Something was coming. She could feel it, though she didn't know what it was. And that's when the plane shuddered violently once more, harder than before, and the cabin fell into terrified silence. Outside, the first distant rumbles of thunder echoed like war drums. The passengers' eyes widened. They clutched seats. The flight attendants braced themselves, and somewhere inside, Maya Collins realized, with the clarity only fear can bring, that the world she knew had ended. The plane was no longer just flying, it was fighting. She was about to find herself in the middle of it. The plane lurched violently. Drinks spilled across trays, laptops slid off tables, and passengers screamed, their voices a mixture of panic and disbelief. Oxygen masks descended from the ceiling like ghosts, snapping into view with a metallic clang. Some snapped them over their children's faces, others fumbled clumsily, unsure how to wear them in their panic. Maya's mother grabbed her arm instinctively, eyes wide and brimming with fear. "Sit, sit," she shouted. But Maya could not stop herself. A pull toward the cockpit, toward the source of the chaos, compelled her forward. Through the aisle, the cabin turned into a battlefield of rolling luggage, flying blankets, and screaming children. Flight attendants tried to maintain order, shouting instructions that were drowned out by the roar of the engines and the cries of terrified passengers. A woman clutched her husband's arm, shaking violently. A man pressed a phone to his ear, muttering prayers as tears streaked down his face. The plane had shifted, tilted, not the gentle banking of a normal turn, but a violent pitch that made stomachs rise and drop. At the front of the plane, the cockpit was chaos incarnate. Captain Reynolds slumped sideways in his seat, a faint gash on his temple bleeding onto his uniform. First Officer Hale fought for control, his knuckles white, sweat pouring down his face as he wrestled the yoke. The plane responded sluggishly, as if resisting every command. Alarms blared from panels, each one sharper and more insistent than the last. Hale glanced at the altimeter. The plane was dropping fast and at an impossible angle. "Brace for impact," Hale yelled, though he knew it was far too early. His voice quavered with fear, a rare, human sound from a man trained to stay calm under extreme circumstances. He fought the controls desperately, pulling every lever, pressing every button, attempting every procedure drilled into him through years of rigorous training. The plane continued its violent descent, dipping another 100 feet in seconds. Maya's instincts screamed at her. She could not explain why, but she felt that if she did not act, the plane and everyone inside would not survive. Her hands trembled as she reached for the cockpit door. Flight attendants tried to stop her, shouting and grasping her arms, but the turbulence threw them off balance. A violent lurch threw Maya sideways, yet she scrambled forward, clutching her sketchbook as though it were a talisman. Inside, Hale struggled to maintain control. Instruments flickered and failed intermittently. The yoke resisted as if the plane itself were trying to throw him off. His radio crackled, but no response came from the control tower. Only static, silence. An eerie, unnatural silence that made the cabin feel disconnected from the world. He pressed buttons repeatedly, voice cracking. "Flight 742, Mayday. Repeat, Mayday. We need vectors now. Come in." Static answered, nothing else. Outside, the sky had darkened. What had been a soft pink and gold horizon just minutes earlier had turned into a swirling, roiling mass of gray and black. Lightning streaked across clouds, illuminating the plane in stark flashes. Thunder boomed, shaking the fuselage, making it impossible to tell which vibrations were mechanical and which came from the storm. Rain lashed the windows with the intensity of a waterfall. Hale's heart sank. Any miscalculation now could mean catastrophe. Maya pushed through the final row of passengers before the cockpit door, her small body moving with determination. Fear and instinct fused into one. Hale's eyes met hers in disbelief. "Get back! You shouldn't be here," he shouted, but his voice was drowned out by another violent jolt. Maya's hands gripped the edge of the cockpit doorway. She was small, but something inside her demanded action. She had memorized flight controls from simulator games, documentaries, and museum exhibits. She understood, on a level deeper than reason, what was happening. The plane's descent was accelerating, and Hale could not hold it alone. The plane shuddered again, violently pitching to the left. The altimeter needle dipped dangerously. Hale's chest rose and fell rapidly. His hands shook as he fought the yoke, trying to stabilize the aircraft, but the plane was not cooperating. He glanced at Maya, a child, no more than 11, standing at the threshold, and felt a surge of incredulous hope. Maybe, just maybe. "Help me," he yelled, his voice barely audible above the roar. Maya nodded, though she barely understood how she could help. She stepped forward, ignoring the screaming passengers behind her, gripping the yoke. Her small hands wrapped around the cool metal, and she mimicked the movements she had practiced countless times in her imagination. Push, pull, steady. She listened to the plane as though it were a living creature. The descent slowed slightly, and Hale's mouth fell open. The cabin erupted in chaos. Passengers shouted, children cried, and flight attendants clung to the overhead bins as if they were lifelines. Coffee spilled across laps. A toddler wailed as her bottle toppled. Some passengers looked around in confusion, noticing the girl in the cockpit doorway. Was she really controlling the plane? It seemed impossible. Hale fought to regain his composure, realizing that Maya's instinctive actions were stabilizing the aircraft, at least temporarily. He barked instructions, guiding her through the basics: gentle turns, slight adjustments, holding altitude. The plane, which had been tilting dangerously, now responded, if only fractionally. "Keep it steady," Hale shouted. The altimeter dropped slower. The engines hummed with an almost obedient purr. Yet outside, lightning struck nearer, and the storm seemed to close in, surrounding them with thunder and rain. Passengers in the cabin began to notice something extraordinary. The plane's violent dips were lessening. The screaming had not stopped, but cries of fear were now mixed with whispers of astonishment. Mothers clutched children tightly, but a sense of hope flickered. Something impossible was happening. A child was holding a plane in her hands, steadying it against forces that could have destroyed it. Maya's breath came in short gasps. Her pencil-thin hands ached from gripping the yoke, but she refused to let go. She watched the instruments as Hale barked adjustments. Sweat ran down her face, her hair plastered to her forehead, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had never imagined her life would come to this, commanding a plane carrying 222 souls through near-certain disaster. Another violent shudder rattled the fuselage. Passengers were thrown against seatbacks, straps, and each other. The plane pitched suddenly downward, then righted slightly as if recognizing the delicate balance between human hands and machine. Hale's voice cracked, but he maintained a thread of calm. "We're not done yet. Focus on the yoke. Steady now, steady." Maya's mind raced. Every instinct, every simulation she had memorized, every sketch she had drawn was guiding her movements. She adjusted slightly, then again, feeling the plane respond. A glimmer of control appeared in the chaos. Yet the storm was unrelenting. Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the terrified faces of passengers. Rain hammered the fuselage like 1,000 drumbeats. The roar of the engines nearly drowned out human sound. Hale glanced at Maya. No words could express the mix of shock, fear, and admiration he felt. The plane had stabilized for now, but for how long? Because somewhere in the storm, something worse was waiting. The sky, the instruments, the unknown forces beyond their sight, all hinted that Flight 742's nightmare was only beginning. And with 222 lives in the balance, one child holding the yoke was the last line between survival and tragedy. Maya's small hands gripped the yoke with trembling resolve. Every fiber of her body screamed with fear, yet instinct and imagination drove her forward. The cockpit, a narrow room of blinking lights and glowing screens, had become her world. She had crossed a threshold most children would never dare approach, and yet the gravity of the situation left her oddly calm in one vital way. She knew what she had to do. Behind her, the cabin was chaos incarnate. Passengers screamed, clutched seatbacks, prayed, and wept. Flight attendants stumbled, some holding children, others trying desperately to prevent luggage from flying across the aisles. The plane pitched and yawned like a living beast, thrashing violently under the combined force of a fierce storm and a faltering autopilot. First Officer Hale's eyes darted between instruments and the child in front of him. He had been trained for emergencies, for every conceivable scenario except this: an 11-year-old gripping the yoke of a plane hurtling through storm clouds at tens of thousands of feet. His voice trembled as he barked instructions. "Gentle adjustments, Maya. Slight push. Don't overcorrect." Her knuckles whitened. The plane dropped suddenly, a stomach-churning plummet that sent coffee cups crashing in the cabin. Hale steadied the throttles as he tried to calculate their descent. Every second mattered. Outside, the storm raged, clouds spinning like angry whirlpools, lightning splitting the sky with jagged brilliance. Rain lashed the cockpit windows, drumming like a relentless warning. Maya mirrored what she had practiced countless times in flight simulators: push, pull, stabilize, level. The yoke responded, almost instinctively, as if recognizing the subtle precision of her hands. The plane shuddered, groaned, and then, tentatively, leveled a fraction of a degree, but enough to halt the downward spiral for the briefest moment. Hale exhaled audibly, but the relief was short-lived. "Brace yourself," he shouted, pointing to the screens flashing ominously. The instruments revealed their worst fear: a warning, stall imminent. The term made the world contract for Hale. In aviation, a stall wasn't just a problem. It was a death sentence if mishandled. The engines were straining, the plane's nose pitched upward uncontrollably, and speed indicators dipped dangerously low. Hale's mind raced, scanning every possible procedure, every last option, but there was only one chance, and it depended on Maya. Maya's heart pounded. She didn't fully understand the term, didn't know exactly how to unstall a plane, but the concept was terrifyingly simple in her mind: push, balance, stay alive. Sweat stung her eyes and her arms shook violently from the strain. She forced herself to breathe, counting in her head as her hands moved with deliberate care. Outside, the storm was unrelenting. Sheets of rain whipped across the fuselage, lightning illuminating terrified faces in the cabin in stark, strobe-like flashes. Thunder roared as if mocking their struggle. Every passenger felt the precariousness of their lives, the thin thread that separated them from disaster. Hale reached over, placing his hands briefly over Maya's. "You're doing it, but keep steady. Don't panic." His words were a lifeline. Maya's small voice barely trembled. "I won't. I can do this." The plane quivered under her grip. The nose tilted dangerously, but her instincts, honed from hours of observation and sheer determination, guided her movements. The engines roared, vibrating through the fuselage, and for the first time, Hale sensed that a child, a mere 11-year-old, might actually save them. Suddenly, another violent lurch tossed the plane. The cabin erupted in chaos again. Bags flew, a mother screamed, a man pressed a tablet to record what he thought might be their final moments. Maya's hands gripped the yoke tighter. She couldn't let go. The altimeter continued to drop. The storm outside had grown more violent, clouds churning in unnatural patterns, and Hale realized that they were descending faster than any safe margin allowed. Every second of indecision could cost hundreds of lives. Then the unimaginable. A small spark of lightning struck perilously close, illuminating the cockpit in a blinding flash. Panels flickered, some instruments failed, and the radio emitted a high-pitched squeal of feedback. Hale's stomach sank. They were on their own. The control tower's silence was complete. No guidance, no vectors, no reassurance. Only the storm, the plane, and Maya. "Stay calm," Hale said, his voice steady despite the terror twisting his gut. "We can do this, just listen to me." Maya nodded, tears streaking her face, but the determination in her eyes burned brighter than fear. She moved the yoke exactly as Hale instructed, small, precise motions. Push down slightly, hold, countertilt. The plane obeyed ever so slightly, and the descent slowed. For a moment, the impossible seemed possible. Then a sudden jolt, the plane tilted sharply left, sending Hale sliding against his seat restraints. Maya nearly lost her grip, but instinct kicked in. She anchored herself, adjusting the yoke with precise, almost unnatural movements for someone her age. The plane trembled, groaned, then leveled once more. Hale's mind raced. He had flown thousands of hours, faced turbulence, engine failures, and storms, but nothing like this. Nothing had prepared him for a child guiding a plane through near-apocalyptic chaos, yet, against all odds, it was working. Back in the cabin, passengers sensed the subtle difference. The violent dips that had thrown them forward eased slightly. The screaming didn't stop, but cries of fear were now mixed with murmurs of astonishment. People stared toward the cockpit, eyes wide, as they realized a child had stepped into a role no adult could have matched in those first, terrifying seconds. Lightning cracked again, closer this time. Thunder shook the fuselage violently, rattling seats and overhead compartments. Hale fought for every last measure of control, adjusting throttles, monitoring engine response. He realized something critical. They weren't just fighting the storm anymore. They were fighting time. Every second they hovered in this violent cloud increased the risk of catastrophic failure. Maya's arms burned. Her vision blurred from sweat and fear, but she refused to let go. She had crossed the threshold of childhood into a realm no one expected, holding the fate of 222 people in her hands. She pushed, pulled, adjusted, and listened. Somehow, someway, the plane responded. It dipped, pitched, and then leveled, the violent oscillation slowing. The cockpit door rattled from the turbulence. Passengers pressed against it, faces pale, staring in awe. They could not believe what they were witnessing. A child at the controls, guiding a massive, screaming machine through the teeth of a merciless storm. And yet, in that moment, the impossible became reality. But as Hale glanced at the screens, his heart sank again. One critical warning flashed red. The plane's speed was dangerously low, another stall warning. They had bought a moment, not safety. Outside, the storm showed no mercy. Sheets of rain pounded the fuselage. Lightning illuminated the twisted clouds like an angry canvas, and the deafening roar of wind threatened to overwhelm all other sound. Every passenger in the cabin felt it, the raw, unfiltered terror of standing on the precipice of disaster. Hale's hand hovered over the yoke, but he could not take it back from Maya. He knew, deep down, that she was their last chance. Maya swallowed hard, sweat stinging her eyes. She had no idea what the storm had in store next, or how the plane would respond. She only knew that if she let go now, if she faltered, if panic overtook her, everyone would die. The plane trembled, shuddered, and the world seemed to narrow into the cockpit, into the yoke, into the small hands that refused to let go. Somewhere beyond the storm, the horizon waited. But for now, there was only the impossible, the unthinkable task of holding a plane steady, of defying nature, of surviving the moment no one could survive. Maya breathed, Hale breathed, and the plane, against all odds, continued to respond barely, delicately, miraculously. The impossible moment had arrived, and the world held its breath. Maya's hands tightened on the yoke, small and trembling, yet unyielding. Every muscle burned, every nerve screamed, and every instinct sharpened to a single point. Hold this plane steady. The cockpit was a maelstrom of flickering lights, sirens, and the low, constant hum of engines straining against the storm. She could feel the vibration through her palms, up her arms, into her chest, a living, breathing reminder of the danger outside. First Officer Hale, seated beside her, was nearly unrecognizable. Sweat streaked his face, uniform soaked, hair plastered to his forehead. His hands hovered near the throttles, eyes darting between instruments and the child who had just become their lifeline. Keep it level, Maya. Steady now, just a little more right. His voice was calm, controlled, but every word carried the weight of desperation. Outside, the storm raged with merciless intensity. Lightning split the sky like jagged knives, illuminating the dark gray clouds, briefly revealing a churning world of wind, rain, and turbulence. Thunder followed almost instantly, vibrating through the fuselage in bone-jarring waves. Rain lashed the cockpit windows, creating a liquid wall that distorted the world outside. Hale realized the plane was caught in the eye of a storm far stronger than any forecast could predict. Maya's vision narrowed to the yoke and the instruments. Push, pull, adjust, subtle, precise movements that kept the nose level and the wings from tilting dangerously. She remembered everything she had ever studied about flight control, every simulator session, every museum visit, every sketch she had drawn of a cockpit. Somehow, that knowledge, theoretical, imagined, had become tangible. Her small hands commanded an enormous machine through near-impossible circumstances. Behind her, the cabin continued to panic. Passengers screamed, cried, prayed, clutched each other. Luggage tumbled down aisles, blankets and jackets floated like white flags of surrender. Flight attendants shouted above the din, trying desperately to keep control, their voices hoarse and frantic. A mother pressed her young daughter against her chest, whispering, "It's going to be okay, just hold on." But the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Hale's eyes never left Maya's hands. "Good, keep it there. Slightly more forward, hold." Each command was precise, almost surgical. Every second counted, every adjustment could be the difference between life and death. The plane lurched again, violently pitching to the left. Maya's body tensed as she countered with a small twist of her wrists, her fingers trembling but steady. The plane responded minutely, and Hale allowed himself a fraction of hope. A warning beep rang out from the instrument panel, "Speed low." Hale's heart sank. The engines were straining, the plane heavy and sluggish in the storm. "We need more thrust," he yelled, reaching for the throttle, but the controls resisted. The turbulence was so violent that even small movements could produce catastrophic results. Maya, sensing the peril, adjusted instinctively. Push, pull, counterbalance, the motions fluid, almost natural. It was as if she had become part of the aircraft, her mind and body attuned to its reactions. Hale glanced at her, disbelief etched across his face. She was keeping them alive, a child, 11 years old, holding the lives of 222 people in her hands. The plane shuddered violently again. Lights flickered inside the cabin. A bag struck a passenger in the arm, eliciting a scream. A man pressed his phone to the window to record what he believed might be his final moments. Rain hammered the fuselage like a relentless drumbeat. Outside, lightning illuminated the scene in brief, blinding flashes, followed immediately by the deafening boom of thunder. Hale's voice cracked, but he remained focused. "Keep it level. We're holding, just hold." Maya's eyes burned, sweat stinging them, but she refused to blink. Her arms ached, muscles trembling, yet she held the yoke like her life depended on it, because, in truth, it did. Every second she maintained control gave passengers a sliver of hope. Every adjustment kept the plane from tipping into a deadly dive. Then a new danger appeared, wind shear. The plane jolted violently upward, then downward, as if invisible hands were tossing it in every direction. Hale swore under his breath, gripping his seat. "Brace yourself," he shouted, though neither of them could prepare for what came next. The altimeter dipped dangerously, indicating rapid loss of altitude. Maya's heart raced, her mind calculating the distance between them and the ground. She forced herself to remain calm, to rely on training, on instinct. "Pull, pull," Hale urged. She obeyed, adjusting the yoke with the precision of someone far older than her years. The nose leveled slightly, the descent slowed, but the danger had not passed. Lightning struck perilously close, illuminating the cockpit in blinding white. Sparks flew from a panel, one of the warning lights shattered. Smoke curled in the corner of the cockpit. Hale's heart sank. The storm wasn't just external anymore. It was infiltrating their instruments, threatening every system. In the cabin, passengers felt the plane's micro-adjustments. The violent dips lessened for a brief moment. A collective, cautious exhale swept through the aisles. Mothers clutched children, whispering prayers. Fathers gripped seatbacks, eyes wide. Everyone sensed the impossible. A child was guiding the plane, holding back the storm, defying fate. Hale's voice remained steady, but internally he was running out of options. "We need to stabilize speed, engines at full thrust, now." The storm's fury made even that nearly impossible. Turbulence battered the plane relentlessly, tossing passengers and luggage like a hurricane in miniature. Maya's small fingers dug into the yoke, her body straining, her mind hyper-focused. The plane quivered under her grip, and she realized something terrifying. They were not out of danger. Every second was a battle, Every adjustment could fail, yet she refused to falter. She glanced briefly at Hale. His face was pale, eyes wide, but there was trust in his expression, absolute trust. He knew, as she did not yet, that the fate of the flight rested in her hands. Then another violent lurch, this time accompanied by a deep groaning sound from the fuselage. Metal flexed, panels rattled, and the engine screamed in protest. Maya's arms burned. Her grip tightened. She forced herself to focus, every adjustment calculated, precise, deliberate. The plane responded minutely, then stabilized again. Hale allowed himself a fraction of hope. "You're doing it, steady." But the storm outside was relentless. Lightning struck closer, the rain turned into sheets, and wind shear continued to batter the plane. Every passing second was an act of defiance against nature itself. The passengers, sensing the subtle difference, began to cling to the hope that life might still be possible. Screams softened into whispered prayers, hands clasped tightly, eyes watching the cockpit with awe and fear. They could not understand what they were witnessing. A child, 11 years old, holding a plane steady in the teeth of an almost apocalyptic storm. Maya's mind focused solely on the yoke. Push, pull, balance, adjust, she became one with the machine. Sweat streamed down her face, arms trembled, but she refused to look away. Every movement counted, every breath mattered, every second was survival. Then Hale spoke, his voice calm but tense. "We have to get through the next cloud cell, it's the worst one yet. Stay steady, Maya, you've got this." Her gaze met his. She nodded, determination replacing fear. The impossible had become her reality, and for now, against all odds, Flight 742 remained airborne. But the storm, massive, unyielding, and indifferent, had not finished with them yet. Outside, the clouds churned, black as night, and the plane plunged further into the tempest. Another flash of lightning illuminated the cockpit, revealing the small, determined figure gripping the yoke, a child, the last line of defense against disaster. And the passengers held their collective breath. The plane rocked violently, tossing passengers against seatbacks, spilling drinks and loose belongings across the cabin. Rain pounded the fuselage like relentless drumbeats. Lightning tore through the clouds, illuminating the terrified faces of passengers pressed against windows, clutching their children. The engines groaned, straining under the storm's fury. Hale's knuckles were white against the throttles. He glanced at the altimeter. They were losing altitude too quickly. Maya's small hands tightened on the yoke. Her muscles burned, her arms trembling, but she refused to let go. Every movement had to be precise. Push slightly, pull just enough to counter the dip, tilt ever so slightly to the left. The plane responded fractionally, but enough to keep them alive. Hale slammed the radio microphone to his lips. "Flight 742, Mayday. We need immediate vectors. Repeat, we need guidance now." "Static." He pressed the call button again. "Control tower, this is Flight 742. Respond, over." "Nothing." "Silence." The radio crackled once more, then died. Not a single voice, no reassurance, no instructions, just the eerie hiss of static. Hale's heart sank. The tower should have been able to guide them, but they were alone. The world outside had disappeared into storm and shadow. Only the plane, the storm, and Maya remained. Maya looked at him wide-eyed. What do we do?" Hale's throat was dry. We fly, that's all we can do." He gestured to the yoke. "You've been holding us steady, keep doing it. Steady, steady." The turbulence intensified. The plane pitched violently left, then right. Lightning flashed directly overhead, the cockpit illuminated like a strobe. Panels flickered. One of the screens blinked and went dark. Smoke began curling from a corner, thin but insistent. Hale swallowed hard, his mind racing through emergency protocols, running simulations in real time. "Hold it, Maya, don't let go," he shouted. She swallowed hard, arms shaking, but she obeyed instinctively. The plane quivered beneath her, responding ever so slightly to her adjustments. The violent dips softened, just a little, enough to stop the worst of the plummet. The cabin continued to scream, children crying, mothers praying, fathers gripping seats with white-knuckled intensity. Every passenger felt the precariousness of their situation, the invisible line between life and death. Some whispered farewells, some clutched rosaries, some wept openly. Yet through the chaos, there was a subtle shift. The plane's movements were less violent. Someone, a child, was holding it together. Hale's eyes flicked to the throttles. He adjusted, praying the engines would respond. One flicker, one spark, one miscalculation, and they would plummet into the storm below. Suddenly the plane lurched again, harder than before. The altimeter dropped sharply. Speed indicators flashed red. Hale cursed under his breath, realizing the engines were reaching their limits. "Maya, we need more lift. Pull up gently." Her small arms shook. The plane's nose pitched upward slightly, the wings groaning under the strain. Instruments flickered again. Sparks jumped from a panel. Smoke began rising from the cockpit ceiling. Hale's heart pounded in his chest. The storm outside had grown even more violent. Rain lashed the windshield at impossible angles. Lightning flashed directly overhead, the sound immediately following in a deafening roar. Wind sheer tore at the plane, pushing it in impossible directions. Hale gritted his teeth, trying to remain calm as he guided her through minute adjustments. "Push a little forward, tilt to the left, steady." His voice cracked, but Maya followed, mimicking every movement with startling precision. The cabin, sensing the subtle stabilization, began to calm slightly. The screaming softened into whispers of awe. Mothers clutched children, whispering prayers of hope. Fathers pressed foreheads to windows, mouths moving in silent pleas. No one could see exactly what was happening at the cockpit, but all could sense a shift in momentum, a fragile thread connecting life to survival. Another violent lurch hit. Coffee spilled, a laptop slid across a tray table, a passenger screamed in terror. Maya's muscles burned. Her arms trembled violently. Hale glanced at her, disbelief etched into his face. "You're holding it, but stay calm, don't fight it, just guide." The plane responded ever so slightly. The descent slowed. The violent dips softened. Every movement was crucial, every fraction of a degree mattered. Hale's fingers hovered, ready to assist, but he knew the plane's survival depended on her. Outside, the storm had become a living thing. Clouds twisted like black smoke, lightning flashed with unrelenting fury, and thunder boomed with terrifying resonance. The runway far below was invisible, a ghostly target buried under sheets of rain. Hale swallowed hard, realizing that if they could not stabilize further, the descent would become catastrophic. "Hold, just hold," Hale shouted. Maya's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Sweat ran down her face, stinging her eyes, but she refused to let go. The plane responded fractionally, a miracle of instinct and determination. Then the radio crackled again. Static at first, a faint, garbled voice. Hale's heart leapt. "Control tower, we can hear you, over." Nothing but hiss. Silence returned immediately. The storm had swallowed the signal. They were truly alone. The plane lurched once more, violently. Hale grabbed the yoke briefly, helping Maya counteract a dangerous dip. Sparks flew from another panel, smoke curling upward. The altimeter continued to drop. The stall warnings flared repeatedly. Hale glanced at Maya. Her small hands were white from gripping the yoke. Her arms shook violently, but her eyes burned with determination, an uncanny calm in the eye of literal chaos. "We can do this, we have to," she whispered under her breath. The engines screamed, the fuselage groaned, lightning illuminated the cockpit in blinding flashes, and the storm seemed to intensify with a malevolent awareness. Every second was a battle, every adjustment a desperate gamble against gravity, wind, and human limits. Hale realized they had bought a moment, not safety. Every second of calm was temporary. Every movement mattered. One wrong adjustment could send them into a catastrophic dive. Maya's mind, focused entirely on the yoke, became one with the plane. She adjusted, corrected, balanced. The descent slowed. The violent shakes softened barely, but enough to keep hope alive. The cabin, sensing the difference, began to whisper. Mothers murmured prayers, passengers held tight to each other. Someone recorded the moment on a shaky phone. They could not see the small hands at the controls, but they felt the invisible thread of survival. Hale's voice cracked as he gave one last instruction. "Keep it steady. You've got this. We're holding just a little more." Lightning struck closer. Thunder exploded like a bomb. Rain pummeled the fuselage, relentless and violent. The plane shuddered violently, then leveled slightly, tenuous but still alive. Maya's small voice whispered, almost to herself, "We can do this, we can get through it." The radio remained silent. The control tower had abandoned them to the storm. Every moment now depended entirely on her instinct, her courage, and Hale's guidance. The impossible had become the only reality. A child was holding a plane steady while the storm, indifferent and unforgiving, tested every second of their survival. And outside, the horizon, barely visible beyond the sheets of rain, promised only uncertainty, waiting to see if they could truly survive the next impossible challenge. The plane shuddered as it tore through the storm. Lightning flashed violently outside, illuminating the cockpit in harsh white bursts, then plunged it back into darkness. Rain hammered the fuselage with relentless force, like the sky itself was punishing them. Hale gritted his teeth, trying to adjust throttles, monitor instruments, and maintain control, but he could feel the strain. The engines were screaming, panels flickering, warnings blaring. Every second brought them closer to catastrophe. Maya's small hands refused to let go of the yoke. Her arms shook, muscles quivering violently, yet she maintained the precision that was keeping the plane alive. The vibrations pulsed through her bones, a constant reminder that every adjustment could mean the difference between life and death. "Steady, steady," she whispered to herself, voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. The cabin was chaos incarnate. Passengers screamed, held hands, clutched children, whispered prayers, or curled into themselves in quiet terror. Overhead bins rattled violently. A laptop slid across a tray table, crashing to the floor with a metallic clang. The smell of coffee mixed with fear and the metallic tang of rain as the plane pitched violently. Every person inside felt the raw immediacy of danger, the razor-thin line between survival and disaster. Hale glanced at Maya. Sweat streaked his face, his shirt clinging to his body. His hands hovered near hers, ready to assist, yet he knew the plane's survival depended entirely on her. "Keep it level, Maya." Gentle adjustments, small, steady movements, were fighting this together. Outside, the storm had transformed into a living entity, swirling clouds twisting like black smoke, winds tearing at the fuselage from impossible angles. Lightning illuminated the world in jagged, intermittent flashes, thunder roaring almost immediately afterward. Rain lashed sideways, streaking the windows like a wall of water. The plane pitched sharply to the right, then dipped, nearly rolling. Hale's stomach lurched. Maya's small body pressed against the yoke, knuckles white. She tilted, pushed, and pulled with an almost unnatural precision. She had become one with the plane, her instincts fused with its movements. Hale adjusted throttles, monitored instruments, and guided her verbally. "A little right, hold steady, now forward." The engines groaned under the strain. Sparks danced across panels. Smoke began to curl from the side of the cockpit. Hale felt a jolt of panic, but he masked it in his voice. "Don't fight it, just guide it, Maya. You're doing amazing, just a little more." The plane lurched violently again. Passengers screamed, and a mother pressed her child to her chest, whispering over and over, "Hold on, it's going to be okay." The roar of the storm was deafening, but the subtle adjustments from Maya kept the plane from pitching into a fatal dive. Hale's voice cracked. "Maya, we're entering the worst part of the storm. We have to fight it, hold the yoke steady. I'll handle the thrust." Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. Her arms burned, her muscles quivering violently, yet she obeyed instinctively. The plane responded a fraction at a time, but enough to prevent disaster. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the cockpit in stark relief. Hale could see every detail, the small hands gripping the yoke, the determination etched into her face, the sweat dripping down her brow. Another violent jolt shook the plane, this one stronger than before. The fuselage groaned under the strain. Hale swore under his breath, adjusting the throttles with careful precision. The altimeter continued to drop. Speed indicators flashed red. The storm was relentless, unforgiving, and indifferent. Yet somehow, the plane held together. Maya's mind was hyper-focused. Every instinct, every simulation, every sketch she had ever drawn became a tool she could rely on. She adjusted, counterbalanced, pushed, pulled, and leveled. The plane trembled under her guidance, responding as though it recognized the determination in her hands. Hale glanced at her, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "You're unbelievable, keep steady." The cabin felt the subtle shift. The violent dips lessened slightly. Some screams softened to gasps. A few passengers whispered prayers, others clutched each other tightly. They could not see the small figure at the yoke, but they sensed the difference. Life, however tenuous, had returned for a moment. The engines screamed as Hale adjusted them to full thrust. The fuselage shuddered violently. Sparks erupted from a panel. Smoke spiraled upward. "We're losing control of some instruments," Hale shouted over the roar. Maya's face was streaked with sweat and tears, but she refused to let go. Her grip was iron, her focus absolute. Every adjustment was precise, calculated, deliberate. The plane responded just barely, enough to keep them in the air. The storm raged with increasing fury. Sheets of rain lashed the windows. Lightning split the sky repeatedly. Thunder rattled the fuselage with bone-shaking intensity. The plane shuddered again, pitching violently to the left. Hale grabbed the yoke briefly to guide her, then let her continue. She was their only chance. Passengers felt the micro-adjustments, the slight stabilization. The violent, stomach-dropping dips became momentarily manageable. Mothers whispered prayers, children clutched stuffed animals, fathers pressed foreheads to windows. The impossible was happening. A child was holding a massive jetliner steady against forces no adult alone could control. Another jolt rocked the plane. Sparks flared again from a damaged panel, smoke curling upward. The altimeter dipped dangerously. Hale realized that while they were surviving, the storm was winning the battle. Every second was a desperate gamble. Maya's arms burned, sweat stung her eyes, but she refused to let go. She whispered almost to herself, "We can, we have to." Her small voice carried a courage beyond her years. Hale adjusted throttles, guided her, and monitored instruments. Together, they were defying the storm. Together, they held life and death in a delicate balance. Lightning struck closer. Rain pounded at impossible angles. The plane shuddered violently, yet Maya's hands did not falter. Her movements were instinctive, fluid, and precise. The storm's fury was unrelenting, but the plane remained airborne. In the cabin, passengers began to sense a fragile hope. Mothers whispered, fathers pressed hands together in silent prayers, children clutched toys or parents, eyes wide with fear. Somewhere, a man recorded the moment on his phone, shaking violently. They did not understand what was happening in the cockpit, but they felt it. Life was holding on. Hale's voice was steady, but inside he was exhausted, running out of options. "We're holding, just hold steady, you've got this." The plane shuddered violently again, a thunderous rumble shaking every panel, every seat, every soul on board. Sparks flared from damaged panels, smoke rose, and engines screamed. Maya's hands ached violently. Muscles trembled. She could feel the plane fighting, resisting, alive. Yet somehow she held it. She became one with the aircraft, every motion precise, every adjustment deliberate. Hale guided her, but she was the anchor now, the line between survival and disaster. Outside, the storm raged on. Black clouds twisted like a living entity, lightning jagged and omnipresent, rain sheets lashing at impossible angles. Hail swallowed hard. Every second was a gamble. One wrong move, one failure, and Flight 742 would plummet into the storm below. Maya's face burned with effort, her vision blurred. Her arms shook violently, but she refused to release the yoke. Sweat ran down her face. Her lips pressed together. Determination burned in her eyes. They were against the storm, fighting nature, fighting fate. And somehow, against all odds, the plane remained airborne. But Hale knew this battle was far from over. The storm had more to throw at them. More turbulence, more lightning, more danger. Every second held a razor's edge. Every moment could be the last. Maya tightened her grip, adjusted, leveled, breathed. And the impossible continued. Flight 742 stayed in the sky. The storm showed no mercy. Lightning struck with terrifying proximity, illuminating the cockpit in brilliant white flashes, then plunging it back into darkness. The roar of thunder rattled the fuselage violently, and sheets of rain lashed the plane like a living whip. Inside, passengers clutched each other, whispered prayers, and braced for the unimaginable. The violent pitch of the aircraft threw bodies against seatbacks. Luggage crashed across aisles, and children screamed in pure terror. Hale's eyes were wide with disbelief and exhaustion. Sweat streamed down his face, his uniform clinging to his body. His hands hovered over the yoke, ready to assist, but he knew this was no longer a battle he could win alone. Maya, small but determined, had become the anchor keeping them airborne. Every adjustment she made was a lifeline, every subtle tilt a refusal to let gravity win. "Steady, steady," Hale urged, his voice cracking slightly. "We're almost there, just a little more." Maya's hands burned from gripping the yoke. Her arms ached, trembling violently, yet she refused to let go. The plane responded to her every movement, minute corrections that kept the nose level, the wings steady. She had become one with the aircraft, her instincts guiding it through turbulence no human alone could manage. Outside, the storm raged. The black clouds twisted like smoke, lightning jagged and omnipresent. Rain lashed at impossible angles, wind sheer tore at the fuselage, and turbulence threatened to flip the plane entirely. Hale monitored every instrument, engines screaming, altimeters dropping, speed indicators flashing red. The plane was pushed to its absolute limits. "Pull back gently, increase thrust, level it now," Hale barked, sweat stinging his eyes. Maya obeyed instinctively. Her movements were precise, deliberate, and fluid, though every second drained her strength. The plane responded fractionally, enough to give hope. Then came the strike that made the cabin lurch violently. Lightning hit perilously close, sending a shudder through the fuselage. Sparks erupted from a cockpit panel, smoke curling upward. The warning alarms blared in rapid succession. Engine strain, low altitude, stall imminent. Hale's stomach knotted. Any second, a catastrophic failure could send them plummeting. In the cabin, passengers felt the terrifying instability. A man whispered a shaky prayer into his hands. A mother clutched her child, murmuring, "Hold on, we're going to make it." The violent movement continued, yet somehow, Maya's small hands kept the plane from tipping into the abyss. The runway was still barely visible, a flickering line through the sheets of rain far below. The storm obscured most of it, making it appear impossibly distant. Hale realized that even with Maya's skill, they would need one last, perfect maneuver to land. Any error, any hesitation would be fatal. Hale leaned over, placing his hands over hers. "This is it, Maya. We have one chance, one perfect approach. Are you ready?" Her hands were white from gripping the yoke. Her arms trembled violently. She nodded. Sweat ran down her face, mixing with tears and rain. I'm ready," she whispered. The plane shuddered violently again. The wind pushed them sideways, the engine screamed, and turbulence tossed them like a rag doll. Hale adjusted thrust, guiding them toward the barely visible runway, but every adjustment was a gamble. One misstep could send them into disaster. Maya adjusted, her small movements precise, calculated. Push forward slightly, tilt left just enough, hold steady. The plane responded fractionally. The descent slowed. The violent dips lessened barely, but it was enough to give them a chance. Outside, the storm reached a crescendo. Lightning struck nearby, thunder shattered the air, rain assaulted the windshield, and wind shear threatened to rip the plane off course. The fuselage groaned under the strain, every bolt and panel fighting against the forces of nature. "Level the wings, keep it straight, don't overcorrect," Hale shouted, his voice tight with urgency. Maya's mind raced. She could feel the plane responding to her, minute corrections holding them on course. Every muscle ached, every nerve screamed, but she refused to falter. The runway flickered closer, a fragile promise through the chaos. A sudden gust pitched the plane violently to the right. Hale grabbed the yoke, assisting just enough to stabilize, then let her continue. Sparks erupted from a panel, smoke curled upward, acrid and stinging. The engine screamed, fighting against the storm's fury. The passengers held their collective breath. Mothers whispered prayers, fathers pressed foreheads to windows, children clutched toys or parents. No one could see the small hands at the yoke, but they felt the invisible thread of survival. Hale adjusted thrust, giving them a fraction more altitude to approach the runway safely. Maya responded, pushing and pulling, tilting and leveling. The plane shuddered violently but did not fall. Not yet. The runway grew closer. The lights flickered through the sheets of rain, a fragile beacon in the storm. Hale felt his chest tighten. One last push, one final adjustment, one perfect descent. Lightning struck again, closer than ever. Sparks erupted from the cockpit panel, and a warning beep indicated engine strain. Hale's heart pounded. Maya's arms shook violently, sweat stinging her eyes, but she refused to let go. "Steady, steady, you can do this, hold it," Hale urged, his voice trembling. Maya's lips pressed together. Her small body was exhausted, trembling, but her hands held the yoke with unwavering determination. The plane responded, guided by the smallest, most precise movements. They were close now, the runway almost beneath them. Rain and wind threatened to push them off course. Lightning illuminated the world outside in blinding flashes. Hale calculated every second, every adjustment, every fraction of a degree. Maya tilted, pulled, and leveled with skill beyond her years. The plane shuddered violently, then stabilized. Enough. Hale guided them gently, engines straining, panels sparking. The runway lights grew brighter. The fuselage groaned. The engine screamed. Smoke curled in the cockpit. Every moment was a razor's edge. Every adjustment could mean life or death. Maya whispered to herself, a mantra against fear. "We can, we can, we can." The plane descended, wings level, nose steady. The landing gear was deployed manually by Hale, each lever pulled with precision. Sparks erupted again, but the plane held. The passengers braced. Hearts pounded. Eyes widened. The final seconds approached. Hale guided her gently. "We're almost there, keep it steady just a little more." Maya's small hands trembled violently, but the yoke responded. The plane aligned with the runway. The engines roared. The fuselage shuddered violently as they approached the asphalt. The wheels touched down, tires screamed, smoke rose, the fuselage groaned. Hale applied reverse thrust. The plane skidded violently, dangerously, but remained on course. Passengers erupted into tears, clutching each other, gasping for breath, whispering thanks and prayers. Mothers held children, fathers wept openly, and children stared wide-eyed at the miracle they had survived. Maya slumped back in the cockpit doorway, exhausted, arms trembling violently, but a smile broke across her tear-streaked face. Hale leaned back, disbelief and relief etched on his face. They had survived. The storm still raged, but Flight 742 had conquered it, against impossible odds, against the fury of nature, and against the limitations of what anyone thought a child could do. Maya's eyes met Hale's. He whispered softly, almost reverently, "You saved them, all of them. You're incredible." She nodded weakly, exhausted but triumphant. "We did it," she whispered. The runway stretched ahead, still wet, still battered by the storm. But for the first time in what felt like eternity, the plane was on solid, steady ground. And for 222 passengers, life had been granted a second chance by an 11-year-old holding a yoke, facing a storm and refusing to let go. The wheels screeched against wet asphalt, smoke curling from the brakes as Flight 742 skidded down the runway. Rain lashed sideways, lightning streaked across the sky, but for the first time in hours the plane was moving toward safety, not plummeting toward disaster. The fuselage groaned under the stress, but miraculously it held. Every passenger clutched their seat or each other, whispering prayers of gratitude, disbelief, and awe. Hale's hand still hovered near the yoke, fingers shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Maya's arms quivered violently, sweat streaking her face, but a faint smile broke through the tension. We did it," she whispered, voice trembling. The engines roared as Hale applied reverse thrust, guiding the plane down the final stretch. Sparks from the damaged panels in the cockpit illuminated the small space like fireflies in a storm. Smoke spiraled upward, but the plane stayed on course. Outside, emergency vehicles waited at the far end of the runway, lights flashing through the sheets of rain. The passengers' screams of terror had shifted to shouts of relief. Mothers clutched children, fathers pressed foreheads to windows, and tears streamed freely down countless faces. Some recorded the miracle on their phones, shaky hands capturing the historic moment, though none could see the hero at the yoke. Hale finally exhaled, his body sagging in relief. He glanced at Maya. She was pale, drenched, arms trembling violently, yet her eyes shone with determination and quiet triumph. You saved everyone," he whispered, voice choked. "I don't know how to thank you." Maya managed a small nod, too exhausted to speak. Her heart was still racing, adrenaline coursing through every vein. She had faced the unimaginable and somehow survived. Somehow she had guided Flight 742 through the storm when every adult, every system, every protocol had failed. The plane slowed, tires screeching, finally coming to a trembling halt. Emergency lights flashed, engines throttled down, and the fuselage groaned as if releasing a long-held breath. Passengers began to move, some hugging, others staggering in shock, overwhelmed by the reality of survival. The cabin was a mixture of chaos and gratitude. Flight attendants moved quickly, checking on passengers, helping children, and tending to those injured by turbulence. A woman sobbed into her husband's chest, whispering, "We're alive, we're alive." The man nodded, voice shaking, tears streaming down his face. Outside, first responders rushed toward the plane, umbrellas and raincoats doing little against the relentless storm. Fire trucks and ambulances converged, lights flashing, engines roaring, yet no one entered the cockpit immediately. Word had spread quickly. A child had piloted the plane. The magnitude of what had happened was almost impossible to comprehend. Hale unbuckled and leaned back in his seat, exhausted, his mind replaying every terrifying moment. He looked at the cockpit instruments, sparks, smoke, and warnings still flashing. They were damaged, battered, stressed, yet the plane had survived, and so had everyone aboard. Maya slumped against the yoke, arms trembling violently, still gripping it as if letting go might undo the miracle she had orchestrated. Hale gently touched her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. "You don't have to hold it anymore." She blinked, reality slowly settling in. The storm still raged outside, yet inside the cockpit a calm triumph had taken hold. Hale guided her away from the yoke, and she sank into the co-pilot seat, trembling and soaked but alive. The passengers, sensing the calm in the cockpit, began to cheer softly, then louder, gradually filling the cabin with applause, tears, and cries of relief. Children clutched stuffed animals or parents. Mothers and fathers pressed hands together in silent thanks. Somewhere, a man recorded the entire moment, capturing the miracle that had just occurred. Emergency personnel finally reached the cockpit. They saw Hale, exhausted but alert, and Maya, small, drenched, eyes wide, a child who had held an entire plane together against impossible odds. Questions were asked, relief expressed, and the reality sank in. Flight 742 had survived, and its survival was owed entirely to the courage and instinct of an 11-year-old. News crews arrived within the hour, capturing images of the rain-soaked tarmac, the exhausted crew, and most importantly, the child hero. Cameras focused on Maya as she stepped out of the cockpit, soaked, trembling, and still holding her backpack. Reporters called out questions, but she only nodded shyly, still processing the enormity of what had happened. Hale stayed by her side, protective and proud. "You did it," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You saved them all." Paramedics led passengers to ambulances, checking for injuries, though miraculously most were minor, bumps, bruises, scrapes from turbulence. The storm had wreaked havoc on the plane's exterior, yet the interior and the lives within had survived intact. Every passenger was shaken, many in tears but alive. As the storm continued to lash the tarmac, news helicopters hovered overhead, capturing the dramatic scene. The narrative was already forming. An 11-year-old had piloted a plane through a violent storm, saving 222 lives. The magnitude of the heroism was incomprehensible. Adults with years of training had been powerless where a child had prevailed. Inside the cockpit, Hale helped Maya remove her jacket, noticing the tremor in her limbs. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met," he said softly. "The entire world should know what you just did." Maya nodded, overwhelmed. Words failed her. She had survived the impossible, guided Flight 742 through hell and emerged alive, yet the reality of it all was still sinking in. Outside, the media descended, interviewing passengers, flight attendants, and Hale. Everyone had the same story. A child had taken control when every adult had failed, holding Flight 742 steady, navigating it through the storm and keeping hundreds alive. Emotional accounts poured in, mothers crying, fathers whispering thanks, children hugging their parents tightly. Back in the cockpit, Hale took a deep breath. He knew that Flight 742 would forever be remembered as one of the most miraculous landings in aviation history. But the focus, he realized, would always be on the small, exhausted figure in the co-pilot seat. A child whose courage, instinct, and determination had rewritten what was possible. Maya looked out the window at the runway, rain still pouring, lightning still flashing, but now she could see the edges of safety. She had done the impossible. Every passenger, every crew member, every person on board owed their life to her focus, her skill, and her courage. Paramedics guided passengers away, helping them to ambulances and buses. Some hugged her without words, tears streaking their faces. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief, whispering, "She saved us." Hale knelt beside Maya. "Do you understand what you just did?" he asked softly. She nodded, finally allowing herself to breathe. I think so," she whispered. The storm began to relent, fatting into distant clouds and fatting thunder. The plane, battered but intact, sat on the runway, a monument to survival, and the passengers, crew, and emergency responders began to grasp the reality. An 11-year-old had piloted a plane through a storm that should have destroyed it, guiding Flight 742 to safety against impossible odds. News crews filmed her, cameras flashing, capturing the rain-soaked, trembling hero who had saved 222 lives. Reporters called it miraculous, unprecedented, and heroic. Headlines would later read, "Child hero saves 222 in miraculous Flight 742 landing." Inside, Hale watched Maya, heart swelling with pride. She had faced death, chaos, and fear, and had emerged victorious. He knew this moment would be remembered forever. Passengers trickled away, hugging her, thanking her, weeping with relief. The cabin was emptying, but the echoes of the storm and their survival lingered in the air. Hale gently guided Maya to the steps of the plane, and she looked back one last time at the cockpit. It had been her battlefield, her arena, and her triumph. Maya's small hands clenched, releasing finally as the adrenaline ebbed. She was exhausted, trembling violently, yet alive. Against every expectation, she had held Flight 742 steady, navigated the storm, and saved 222 lives. And in that quiet, rain-soaked moment on the runway, the world saw something extraordinary. Courage and instinct transcending age, fear overcome by determination, and the impossible made real by the hands of an 11-year-old. The plane, still trembling, finally fell silent. Emergency crews surrounded it. Passengers embraced their miracle. And Maya, small, soaked, trembling, and exhausted, stepped into history.